Part 1, The Broken Down Royal. Tyrone wiped his dirty hands on an old rag as the biggest spaceship he'd ever seen came floating into the repair dock. The thing was huge, like 3 city blocks stuck together and covered in shiny metal that seemed to glow by itself. Sparks were shooting out from the back end, and black smoke was pouring from what looked like engine vents. "Well, that don't look good," Tyrone muttered to himself. He'd been fixing broken-down ships at this little space station for 8 years now. Most days it was just cargo haulers with busted thrusters or mining vessels that needed new power cells. Nothing fancy. Nothing that paid real good money either. But this ship? This was something else entirely. The airlock opened with a loud hiss, and out stepped the most beautiful woman Tyrone had ever laid eyes on. Well, she would have been if she was human. Her skin was bright blue and covered in tiny scales that caught the light like diamonds. She had 4 arms instead of 2, and she was tall, real tall. Maybe 7 feet without the fancy crown sitting on her head. Behind her came a whole parade of creatures that looked just like her, all dressed in clothes that probably cost more than Tyrone made in a year. They were carrying strange devices and talking in a language that sounded like singing mixed with clicking sounds. "Who is in charge of this primitive facility?" the blue woman called out. Her voice was clear and powerful, like she was used to being listened to. Old Pete, the station manager, came shuffling over. He was nervous. Tyrone could tell because Pete always scratched his bald head when he was worried. "That would be me, ma'am. Pete Morrison, station manager. How can we help you?" The woman looked around the dirty repair bay like she was studying bugs under a microscope. "I am Queen Kendra of the Zephyrian Empire. My royal vessel has suffered engine failure. My chief engineers inform me that your technology is far too basic to assist us." One of her fancy-dressed followers stepped forward. This one had 6 arms and wore robes covered in what looked like real jewels. "Your Majesty, perhaps we should continue to the core worlds. These humans cannot possibly understand our advanced fusion systems." Queen Kendra raised one of her 4 hands and everyone went quiet. "Nevertheless, we are stranded until repairs can be made." She looked directly at Tyrone, who was still standing there with his mouth half open. "You there, mechanic? What is your name?" Tyrone, Your Majesty. Tyrone Jackson." "Well, Tyrone Jackson, my royal engineers tell me this station lacks the capability to repair quantum fusion drives. What do you say to that?" Tyrone glanced at the smoking ship, then back at the Queen. "I'd say I'd need to take a look first before I tell you what I can or can't fix." The Queen's followers started making those clicking sounds again, but louder now. Seemed like they were arguing about something. The 6-armed one was waving his arms around like he was real upset. "Amusing," Queen Kendra said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Very well, human. If you can repair what the finest engineers in the galaxy cannot, I will marry you myself." The whole group burst into laughter. Even the Queen was chuckling like she'd just told the funniest joke in the universe. But Tyrone wasn't laughing. He was looking at that ship, watching the way the smoke was coming out. He'd seen patterns like that before. Usually meant the problem wasn't where you'd expect it to be. "You serious about that?" he asked. Queen Kendra's laughter got louder. "Completely serious, Tyrone Jackson. Fix my ship and you can be king of half the galaxy. Fail and well?" She shrugged like it didn't matter much either way. Her followers were practically falling over themselves laughing now. The 6-armed engineer was making jokes in their singing language, and the others were pointing at Tyrone like he was the entertainment. Pete pulled Tyrone aside and whispered, "Son, maybe you should just tell them you can't help. These folks don't look like the type who take jokes well." But Tyrone was already walking toward the ship, his old toolbox in hand. "Won't know till I try, Pete." As he got closer to the massive vessel, he could hear the alien engineers still laughing behind him. They were probably right. He was just a human mechanic from a nowhere space station. What did he know about alien technology? But engines were engines, right? And something was definitely wrong with this one. The question was whether he was brave enough or stupid enough to try fixing it. Looking up at the towering ship, Tyrone figured he was about to find out which one he really was. Part 2, Human Ingenuity versus Alien Tech. Tyrone crawled under the massive alien ship with nothing but his flashlight and his grandfather's beat-up toolbox. The thing was so big that standing underneath it felt like being inside a metal cave. Strange blue lights pulsed along the hull, and he could hear humming sounds that made his teeth ache. Above him, the alien engineers were running around with devices that looked like they cost more than his entire space station. They had holographic displays floating in the air, scanners that beeped and chirped, and tools that glowed with their own light. Everything they touched seemed to respond with fancy light shows and musical tones. "The quantum resonance is completely destabilized," one of them was saying in accented English. The fusion matrix has collapsed at the molecular level. Perhaps we need to recalibrate the neutron flow regulators, suggested another, waving a device that projected a three-dimensional map of the ship's insides. Tyrone rolled his eyes. These folks sure like their big words. He'd been fixing things since he was 10 years old, starting with his mom's old hover car in their garage back on Earth. One thing he'd learned was that when something broke, it usually broke for simple reasons. He aimed his flashlight at the ship's belly and started following the power lines. The aliens had all sorts of fancy conduits and energy pathways that twisted and turned like artwork. But underneath all that pretty stuff, he could see the basic systems that actually made the ship work. "Hey, Your Majesty," he called out. "Can you try starting the engines?" Queen Kendra looked annoyed. "Human, we have run diagnostics 17 times. The engines will not respond. Just humor me." She said something in her musical language and one of her crew pressed some buttons. The ship shuddered, lights flickered, and then nothing. Dead silence. But Tyrone had been watching the power lines when it happened. For just a split second he'd seen something that made him smile. "Turn it off and try again." "This is pointless," the six-armed engineer muttered. "The human cannot possibly understand our technology." "Do it anyway," the Queen ordered. This time Tyrone was ready. When the ship tried to start, he watched the power flow through the system. Most of it moved through those fancy quantum pathways the aliens were so proud of. But right at the crucial moment, everything stopped at a little junction box that looked about as advanced as a $20 part from any hardware store. "Found your problem," Tyrone announced, sliding out from under the ship. The aliens stopped their chattering and stared at him. Queen Kendra crossed her upper pair of arms. "Enlighten us." Tyrone pointed to the small gray box mounted on the ship's underside. "That little guy right there is fried. Your whole fancy system is trying to route power through a burned-out relay." The head engineer looked where Tyrone was pointing and made a dismissive noise. "Impossible. That is merely a backup power coupler. Our primary systems do not depend on such primitive components. Want to bet?" Tyrone opened his toolbox and pulled out a replacement part he'd salvaged from a cargo hauler last week. "This here is a standard Type 7 power relay. Costs about 15 credits at any supply depot. I'm guessing you folks picked it up somewhere as a backup and forgot about it." He held up the burnt-out part he'd just removed. Half of it was melted and it smelled like burned plastic. "But when your primary quantum doohickeys got overloaded, your system automatically switched to the backup. Only problem was the backup couldn't handle the load." The alien engineers crowded around, studying the tiny component with their fancy scanners. Their expressions changed from dismissive to confused to embarrassed. "But our diagnostics showed quantum fusion failure," one of them protested. "Because that's what you were looking for," Tyrone said, connecting the new relay. "Sometimes the biggest problems have the smallest causes. My dad used to say that a 50,000 credit hover car could be stopped dead by a 5-cent fuse." He finished the installation and stepped back. "Try her now, Your Majesty." Queen Kendra looked skeptical, but she nodded to her crew. This time when they activated the engines, the whole ship came alive. Lights blazed, the humming sound became a powerful rumble, and energy flowed through all those pretty conduits like water through pipes. The silence that followed was so complete that Tyrone could hear his own heartbeat. The six-armed engineer stared at his instruments like they'd betrayed him. This cannot be." "Sometimes the old ways work best," Tyrone said, closing his toolbox. "You folks built yourselves a beautiful ship, but you forgot that the fancy stuff is only as good as the simple stuff holding it together." Queen Kendra was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. It wasn't mocking anymore. It was something else entirely. "Well," she said slowly, "it appears I owe you a wedding." Part 3, The Queen's Dilemma. Queen Kendra stood in her private chambers aboard the royal ship, staring out at the stars while her advisors argued behind her. The room was huge and fancy, with floating crystals that gave off soft light and walls covered in what looked like liquid gold. But right now it felt more like a prison. "Your Majesty, surely you cannot be serious about this ridiculous promise," Commander Zara said for the 10th time. She was the Queen's military chief, a tough woman with scars across her blue face from years of battle. Marriage to a primitive human? The noble families will revolt. The six-armed engineer, whose name was Dr. Vex, was pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "It was clearly a jest, Your Majesty. No one could have expected that the human would actually succeed. Our own computer said the task was impossible. Yet he did it in 20 minutes with a 15-credit part," Queen Kendra replied quietly. Her chief counselor, an elderly alien named Minister Korath, stepped forward. His forearms were folded in what their people considered a respectful pose. Your Majesty, there are ways around this. Grant the human a fortune. Make him a duke of some distant world. Surely he will accept riches over marriage to someone so far above his station. Queen Kendra turned away from the window. She'd been thinking about Tyrone Jackson for 3 hours now, ever since her ship's engines had roared back to life. Not about marrying him, that was crazy talk. But about the way he'd approached the problem that had stumped her best people. Send for him, she ordered. Your Majesty, Commander Zara started to protest. Send for him. Now. 20 minutes later, Tyrone walked into the royal chamber like he was entering Pete's office back at the station. He didn't bow or scrape or act impressed by all the fancy decorations. He just looked around with curious eyes and said, "Nice place you got here." The advisors made shocked gasping sounds. In their culture, people prostrated themselves before royalty. But Queen Kendra found herself smiling despite the situation. Tyrone Jackson, she said formally, you have fulfilled the terms of my challenge. According to the laws of my people, I am bound to honor my promise of marriage. Tyrone scratched his head. About that, Your Majesty. I've been thinking and I got a question. Speak. You really meant what you said? About marrying whoever fixed your ship? Dr. Vex made a strangled noise. Of course she did not mean it. It was obviously a jest to demonstrate the impossibility of the task. But Tyrone was looking straight at Queen Kendra, waiting for her answer. She found herself remembering something her father had told her when she was young. A ruler's word is the foundation of their kingdom. Break it once and no one will ever trust you again. Yes, she said quietly. I meant it. My word is my bond. Then I got another question. What happens if I say no? The room went dead silent. Commander Zara's mouth fell open. Minister Korath nearly dropped his ceremonial staff. Even Dr. Vex stopped pacing. You would refuse? Queen Kendra asked, genuinely surprised. Tyrone shrugged. I'm just a mechanic from nowhere, Your Majesty. What do I know about being married to a queen? About ruling planets and commanding fleets? You need someone who understands all that fancy stuff. But the wealth, Minister Korath sputtered. The power. You could rule half the galaxy. Don't much want to rule anything, Tyrone said. I like fixing things. Simple things. Things I understand. He looked at Queen Kendra with honest eyes. Besides, seems to me marriage should be about more than keeping promises. Should be about two people who actually want to be together. Queen Kendra felt something strange in her chest. Relief, maybe, mixed with something else she couldn't name. Then what do you want, Tyrone Jackson? Gold? Your own planet? A fleet of ships? Just passage home if that's all right. My little sister Keisha is getting married next month, and I promised I'd walk her down the aisle. Already missed too much family stuff working out here in space. The advisors looked at each other like Tyrone had lost his mind. Commander Zara whispered something about human insanity to Dr. Vex. But Queen Kendra found herself studying this strange human more carefully. He turned down riches, power, and the chance to marry royalty just to keep a promise to his sister. In her world, people schemed and plotted for years just to get a moment of her attention. You would give up everything for a family obligation? She asked. Wouldn't be giving up everything, Tyrone said with a smile. Would be keeping what matters most. For the first time in her life, Queen Kendra wondered what it would be like to have someone care about her that way. Part 4. Unexpected Partnership. 2 weeks had passed since Tyrone fixed the Queen's ship, and he figured he'd be heading home any day now. But then everything went sideways for the Zephyrian Empire, and suddenly nobody was talking about Earth anymore. It started with emergency messages flooding the royal ship's communication center. Commander Zara was running around barking orders while Dr. Vex pulled up holographic maps that showed red warning lights blinking all over the galaxy. Your Majesty, Commander Zara announced, bursting into the throne room where Queen Kendra was holding court. The Crimson Brotherhood has seized the mining colonies in the Outer Rim. They've also hit our supply depots on Kepler 7 and Titan Base. Tyrone was sitting in the corner, supposedly waiting for his transport arrangements, but really just fascinated by watching alien politics in action. The Queen's whole demeanor changed when she heard the news. The relaxed, almost friendly woman he'd been talking to disappeared, replaced by someone who looked like she could command armies. How many ships? She demanded. 12 major worlds, Your Majesty. But here's the problem, we can't pin them down. Every time our battle fleets arrive, the rebels are already gone. They strike fast, steal what they need, and vanish into civilian populations. Dr. Vex brought up a tactical display that showed the rebel attacks like red dots spreading across the star map. They're using guerrilla tactics, Your Majesty. Our traditional military strategies are proving ineffective. Queen Kendra studied the map with growing frustration. What do our generals recommend? Admiral Thorne suggests we blockade the affected systems. Cut off their supply lines and force them into open battle. That could take months, the Queen said. And our people on those worlds will suffer while we wait. Tyrone found himself leaning forward, studying the pattern of attacks. It reminded him of something he'd read about in old Earth history books. The way smaller forces had fought bigger ones when they couldn't win in straight-up battles. Permission to speak, Your Majesty? Everyone turned to look at him like they'd forgotten he was there. Commander Zara frowned. This is a military matter, human. But Queen Kendra nodded. What do you see, Tyrone? He walked up to the holographic display and pointed at the pattern of red dots. Back on Earth, we had a saying, don't fight the war your enemy wants you to fight. These rebels, they're not trying to beat your fleets head on. They're trying to make you chase them around until you wear yourselves out. And? Dr. Vex asked impatiently. So don't chase them. Make them come to you. Commander Zara made a dismissive noise. Simplistic thinking. We cannot abandon our duty to protect our colonies. I'm not saying abandon them. I'm saying stop doing what they expect you to do. Tyrone pointed to a cluster of systems near the center of the rebel activity. See this area here? They keep hitting the same region because that's where your valuable stuff is. So give them something they can't resist, but on your terms. Queen Kendra was listening intently now. Explain. Set a trap. Make it look like you're pulling your fleets back to defend the core worlds. Leave one really tempting target barely defended, maybe a supply convoy carrying something they desperately need. When they show up to grab it, you'll know exactly where they'll be and when. The rebels are not fools, Commander Zara protested. They will see through such deception. Will they? Tyrone asked. Right now they think they've got you figured out. They attack, you respond predictably, they disappear. What if you do something completely different? Something that makes no sense to them until it's too late. Over the next several days, Tyrone found himself drawn into the military planning sessions. His suggestions were simple compared to the complex strategies the alien commanders preferred, but they had a logic that started making sense to Queen Kendra. Use maintenance ships instead of military transports, he suggested during one meeting. The rebels won't expect cargo vessels to be carrying trap components. Brilliant, Dr. Vex admitted grudgingly. When the trap was finally sprung, it worked better than anyone had dared hope. The rebel fleet, expecting another easy raid, found themselves surrounded by battle cruisers that had been disguised as broken-down freighters. But the real breakthrough came when Tyrone suggested something that shocked everyone. Don't destroy their ships. Capture them. Then use their own communication codes to feed false information to the other rebel cells. Deception warfare, Commander Zara mused. We have always favored honorable, direct combat. Sometimes you need to be flexible, Tyrone said. The goal is to protect your people, right? Not to fight fair. Within a month, the rebellion was crumbling. Not because the royal forces had overwhelmed them with superior firepower, but because they'd been outmaneuvered and confused by tactics they didn't understand. Queen Kendra watched the final reports come in from her command center. The crisis was over, her empire was secure, and somehow a human mechanic had played a bigger role in saving it than her entire military academy. How did you know these strategies would work? She asked him. Tyrone shrugged. Same way I knew how to fix your ship. Sometimes you got to look at problems from a different angle. Looking at him now, Queen Kendra realized something had changed. This wasn't just about keeping a promise anymore. Part 5, The Choice. The royal ship hung in space above Earth, and Tyrone could see the blue and white marble that was his home world spinning slowly below. He'd been staring out the observation window for an hour now, thinking about everything that had happened over the past 2 months. Behind him, Queen Kendra approached quietly. She'd changed out of her formal robes and was wearing something simpler. Though on her, even simple clothes looked like they belonged in a palace. Second thoughts? She asked, joining him at the window. Just thinking about how crazy all this has been, Tyrone replied. 2 months ago, I was fixing busted cargo haulers and complaining about not having enough work. Now I've helped save an empire and got a marriage proposal from a queen. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching Earth turn. The planet looked so peaceful from up here. No borders visible, no signs of the struggles happening on the surface. Just home. Tyrone, Queen Kendra said finally, I want you to know that you're free to go. What happened between us, The promise, the marriage offer. I can make it all disappear. My advisors have prepared documents declaring the original agreement null and void due to extraordinary circumstances. He turned to look at her. You don't want to go through with it? That's not what I said. She was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. I'm giving you a choice. A real choice, not one forced by circumstances or honor-bound promises. Down in the ship's main bay, Tyrone could see the transport shuttle being prepared for his trip home. His old duffel bag was already loaded, along with a small fortune in Zephyrian credits that the Queen had insisted he take as payment for his services. My sister's wedding is tomorrow, he said. I promised I'd be there. I know. The shuttle is ready whenever you are. But Tyrone didn't move toward the door. Instead, he found himself thinking about the past weeks, working alongside Queen Kendra to solve problems, watching her make decisions that affected billions of people, seeing how she really cared about her subjects even when it meant making hard choices. Can I ask you something? He said. Of course. Why are you really letting me go? I mean, your advisors have been against this marriage from day one. Commander Zara probably threw a party when she heard you were releasing me from the promise. Queen Kendra smiled, but there was sadness in it. Because marrying someone who doesn't want to be married to you isn't really marriage at all. It's just a contract. And you deserve better than that. What if I told you I've been thinking about it? About staying? She looked surprised. Have you? Tyrone ran his hand through his hair, a habit he'd picked up when he was nervous. Look, I'm not going to pretend I understand all the politics and royal protocol stuff. I don't know the first thing about running an empire or dealing with alien nobles who think humans are barely smart enough to tie their own shoes. But these past weeks working with you to solve problems, that felt right. Like we were a team. And not just because you're the queen and I'm the mechanic. We think differently, but somehow that makes us better at figuring things out together. Queen Kendra was staring at him now with an expression he couldn't quite read. Hope, maybe mixed with disbelief. You would give up your home world? Your family? Your simple life fixing ships? Who says I'd have to give up fixing ships? Seems to me an empire this big probably has plenty of things that need fixing. And as for family? He gestured toward Earth. My sister's getting married tomorrow. Maybe it's time I thought about that too. But the cultural differences, she protested. The political complications. My advisors will never accept. Your advisors will learn to deal with it, Tyrone interrupted with a grin. Same way they learned to deal with my military strategies. Sometimes the best solutions come from unexpected places, remember? Queen Kendra was quiet for a long time, studying his face like she was trying to see if he really meant what he was saying. Are you sure? She asked finally. This isn't just about keeping a promise anymore. This is about choosing a completely different life. Tyrone looked out at Earth one more time, then back at her. I'm sure. But I got one condition. Name it. I still want to go to Keisha's wedding tomorrow. Think a queen can spare a day to meet her new in-laws? For the first time since he'd known her, Queen Kendra laughed with pure joy. I think that can be arranged. As the shuttle prepared for its trip to Earth, now carrying 2 passengers instead of 1, Tyrone realized that sometimes the biggest adventures start with the smallest repairs. And sometimes, fixing something broken is just the beginning of building something entirely new.